Justin McLean.
He's a US Army veteran who served in Iraq. Justin McLean. Justin, great to see you.
We have on the podcast with us Pastor Justin McLean.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Too Far Gone with Justin McLean. I am so honored to introduce our guest for this week. My brother, my good friend, the guy who has always been able to advise me on some of the best and worst things to do in life. Marcus Gwin, you and I were in 526 in the 101st Airborne Division together. And it was probably the weirdest time for any unit in the military. And you know why I'm wording it that way. So I want to tell everybody the Army was restructuring. And so they were going from large brigades and big deployments and, you know, the division support command and discom and all that. And like, so they had this massive army that they would roll out, and then they changed it to these brigade combat teams. And in the process of doing that, the infantry no longer provided security for our recovery assets and resupply missions. And so what they did was they restructured us POGs, personnel other than grunts. And so they tasked a few of us and they said, hey, you guys are going to provide security. And so Marcus and a few others come to this POG unit of guys who had never, you know, really seen combat or anything like that, and gets integrated. And so Marcus shows up to this unit that is strictly, you know, supply, fuelers, and everything. And Marcus, you were, now correct me if I'm wrong, you were a combat engineer, right?
Correct.
So let me like walk me through that first couple of days at Best Buy Performance.
Well, you know, when I first got to the 101st Airborne Division, just like everybody else, you know, I did all my own processing stuff and, you know, went through and did all the check the block stuff that you got to do. And then I got a visit and they said, hey, look, you're going over here to this unit. And, you know, I had no idea where I was going. I didn't know what I was going to be doing. So I drive over there and start meeting everybody. Well, then all of a sudden I realized that, you know, this is a bunch of guys that are fuelers and cooks and truck drivers and water purification personnel. And I'm like, okay, well, where do I fit in? And then I find out, you know, there's a couple other guys that are there that, you know, are kind of off the wall MOSs. And at the time we had a company commander, Captain Hammond, who, you know, he walks in and he kind of looks at me and he looks at looks at where I came from and what I'd been doing prior. And he said, well, you're just coming straight off of a deployment. I went, yeah. Well, at that time, the Army said, you get day for day stabilization. You get to stay back here. You don't have to deploy. And I was like, I'll go anyway. But, you know, I had no earthly idea what I was getting myself into. And, gun truck, which is, I guess you could say the platoon, I guess we were about a platoon size element that we kind of got thrown into. You know, nobody had any earthly idea what they were fixing to get themselves into. Because I don't think anybody besides myself and maybe one other person had ever been on a combat deployment before. And, you know, when you step off that bus and you're in Kuwait and it's the middle of the night because they never fly you in during daylight hours, you know, they never want you to see where you're going. You know, you step off that bus and then they take you to that big, huge white tent and, you know, and you're sitting there and, you know, all of a sudden you realize, man, it's 150 degrees in the shade out here. You know, it becomes a culture shock for a lot of people. And, you know, and then nobody knowing exactly what they're going to be doing, like I said, what they're getting themselves into, you know, and then we try to do, you know, what little bit of training they say you need to do prior to going. And then once we get there, they say, oh, well, you know, here you go. Here's your vehicles. This is where you're going. See ya. Have a nice day.
Now, I had just gotten back from selection. Was I still in the wheelchair when you were there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I thought so.
Yeah. There was And I think there was one other guy that didn't stay. He didn't stay in the company, but he had just gotten back from selection. Also, I think you guys both came back at the same time, and he ended up going. I think he went to Third Brigade. I think he
Yep.
went over there. But yeah, and even the leadership that we had, they had no earthly idea. They had no clue. And when you're so when you get into a situation like that, and you're kind of looking around, you're going, man, none of these guys really know what in the world they're doing. They have no clue. And and even people that were, they're like, okay, we've got to go out here, we've got to drive up and down this road, and we got to make sure that there's no IEDs in the road. We got to make sure that if we are getting shot at, that we know how to shoot back, and we know how to control the crowds and get everybody out of our way and all that stuff. When you have no idea what you're doing, it can get pretty hairy pretty fast.
Yeah, I remember stateside training. In fact, they gave me so Captain Hammond had come up to me and was said, he says, "Hey, McLean, I got something that's gonna be right up your alley." And of course, yeah, I'm still in a wheelchair. I actually no, I think I just gotten out of the wheelchair. I think they determined that I could put weight on one of my legs, and so I was on crutches. And he says, "We're gonna start a gun truck platoon." I'm like, "Gun truck? What's a gun?" I was a warehouse clerk. My first deployment, I worked in the SSA. I mean, I did a few convoys, resupply and dropped off, sensitive items, but nothing like, what they were setting us up for. And then it was a couple of months later, I think I'd finally gotten off the crutches and they sent us up to the mountain site. And it was funny because we get up to the mountain site and, there was a few guys from fifth group there and a few guys who, if I remember correctly, there were some Rangers there, but I think they actually had flown in some guys from Ranger Bat to teach us. And I remember when we got there, two of the guys from fifth group had actually just gotten out of recruiting duty, and I knew him from recruiting duty. So we had it in fairly quickly because I was able to talk to these guys and was like, "Oh, so this is what's going on," and we ended up. I had a blast. I think that was the funnest, best thing I'd ever done was that mountain site.
Well, what's really weird is when you got guys that are in fifth group, and some of those guys are a few fries short of a Happy Meal as it is anyway. And they're out there. This one guy, I don't know if you were still up there because they had all their different weapons. You get to shoot some pretty cool stuff and do some pretty cool things. And what was really weird is this guy gets out of his car and he's in his underwear, and he walks up, starts shooting on the range in his underwear. And I had that guy had to be like 10 sheets to the wind. And I mean, he's out there not missing a leg, not missing a target, turns around, says, "Okay, I'm done," turns around, walks back, gets in his car and leaves and goes back home.
Yeah, you're talking about I remember that. He needed to qualify with an M9 for some strange reason. Yeah, he came out there, handed his sheet to the range control, popped off a few. I think he was actually wearing Ranger panties. I think he was just in shorts. I don't think he was in his underwear, but yeah, I mean, might as well be underwear. But yeah,
It
a
was
strange time.
dude, it was weird. But all in all, with the deployment, looking back on it, I met a lot of really interesting people while we were there. But there's some pretty cool people that were in the unit with us, and we got real close real fast. You got to know each other and know each other's backgrounds and where you came from, and in our case, because we lived almost right next door to each other, I do believe. We got to know each other's religions really good, and it was a situation of because back then, I don't know if you've ever put this out on your podcast, so if I'm outing you, I apologize. But back then you were dead set that you were going to be a pagan for life,
Oh
and
yeah.
nothing was going to change your mind, and nothing could sway you the other way. and I remember we had some pretty interesting conversations a few times. We would sit down and you would give me your point of view and I'd listen. I mean, because I believe everybody has their own point of view and deserves to have their own opinion. Then I'd give you mine, and I'd be like, okay, well, I'll keep plugging at this. Keep on and keep on and keep on. But eventually, the deployment when the deployment came over, we came back home. That right there, I'm going to tell you, was probably the hardest time that I've ever had with sticking with my faith. Post deployment was rough, man. It was rough for me. You know, Combined with the other deployment that I'd already been on, loss of life and things that you have to go through, and and wondering, why you made it back home, but the other people didn't, and
Yeah.
and all that. Man, that's a earth shaking thing.
Yeah.
And you made the statement to me while we were deployed. Well, we're sitting over here and we're in a country where we're getting shot at and people are dying, and and people are getting injured and they're getting hurt. What kind of a God lets things like that happen?
Yeah.
And so man, I mean, and I tried to hide everything that I had experienced, that I had gone through, and at that point, and thought that I could find the answer at the bottom of a whiskey bottle, and and it, unfortunately, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
You work up, you wake up with a little bit less money in your pocket, and often a very bad headache, and the problem that you had before it's still there and it still exists.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know um and and then you got to come back, and you got to deal with, in our case, change of commands. We had a change of command in the middle of deployment, and it was a change of thought process, I guess I would say, more than a change of command. We everything that we had been going through and been training with, and up until that point, everything was going, in my opinion, really smooth. And then all of a sudden, you get a change of command in the middle of a combat deployment, which I think had to have been the dumbest thing that they could have done. Now you got a different school of thought, so now you got to change up what you're doing, and and change up how you're doing things and how you react to things, and it was a mess.
Yeah. 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 I remember it completely turned things up on its head, and I was stop lost. In fact, I should have gotten out of the army, and I think I did the math. It was about 2 weeks, almost to the day, before I struck those two IEDs. I should have been completely out of the army by that point.
Yeah.
And that caused a lot of bitterness with me. And I know, with the change of commands and all that stuff, it's like, it seems like they had no idea what was going on in those early days.
You know, getting injured in a combat zone, and it happened to me on unfortunately more than one occasion. And you know, it puts a bitter taste in your mouth when the way you would think that the army would treat it versus the way that it actually gets done. If I'm speaking as politically correct as I can.
Yeah.
The thing is to me, I see other units, and I see how, and I've had numerous friends that were in different combat units all over the world. It seems like that the scenarios get really different, but one core thing that rings true: when you're in the military, when you're on the in, you're in. And they'll do anything and everything that they possibly can to keep you combat ready. They want to make sure that you are as healthy as possible, so that they can send you out to go do your job. However, once you get hurt and you're injured and you really can't do your job, in your case, you were in a wheelchair, you know, sometimes you get kind of lost in the sauce. And,
Yep.
and you get kind of forgotten about, because they're not concentrating on you. They're concentrating on the other group.
Mhm.
And even though they downsized the military, from big brigade, and big division deployments to, the brigade combat teams, it still got kind of put that way. Now, with all that being said, I was at my first duty station was Fort Stewart, Georgia. Second one was there at Fort Campbell with you, and my last and final duty station was Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. I would not change one single solitary day of my military career. Not one. It made me the person that I am now. And I took every good aspect out of the military that I possibly could. Um, it taught me a lot of discipline. It did teach me, a lot for partly a little organization, but it also taught me, how to interact with people that not only of different religions, but of different, cultural backgrounds and, you know, uh, economic backgrounds. It taught me how to be able to interact with those kind of people to the point to where I think I could go anywhere in the world and be okay.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of positives that I took out of the military. I wouldn't change anything about it. I wouldn't change who I deployed with. I wouldn't, from me and you, look, we deployed. I think we left 2005 is when we left.
Yeah, yeah, it was fall of 2005, and we
Yeah,
came back late summer of 2006 because I got hit June 29th, and
yeah,
we got back, I think it was a few months after that. I think it was late August.
yep. So that was 2005 was when I met you, and here it is over 20 years later, and we're still talking. I mean, I got to thinking about this. I got to think about that the other day. I got out of the military in 2010. That was my last year that I was in the Army. I'm like, okay, 2010, 2020. I'm like, I'm coming up on 20 years I've been out of the military. I'm
Mhm.
like, oh my God. And then I got thinking, I'm like, my first deployment was in 2000. Well, I maybe no, no. Let me backtrack. My first deployment was 2003. So I'm going, it's been over 20 years since I went on my first combat deployment to Iraq. I'm like, man, has it been that long?
Yeah, yeah.
Time flies when you're having fun, I guess, man. You know?
Yeah, and it kind of makes you wonder and really appreciate how some wounds take so long to heal. There's still days where, I think about a PFC Wirtz from, when we are on that training convoy
Yeah.
Sergeant McSwain. Those two guys probably pop into my head at least once a week still. And without any bitterness, I just want to remember them. And I definitely feel like my time in the military definitely helps me now be able to speak to other people and evangelize. And I think it's so effective because everybody really tried to evangelize with me. I mean, even with my first deployment, I had my entire platoon show up outside of my hooch, uh, try, like, hey, McLean, we want to pray for you. And I was like, pray for me. I just came off guard duty. I want to go to bed. Like, just pray, make it short. Let's go. And up to, Captain Rogers, we pretty much had our own chaplain who just spent almost every day with us. Uh,
Yeah.
and I heard, I don't know if I've ever said this to you before. I heard a pastor, he was giving a speech, and he said it takes 155 interactions to bring somebody to Christ. And I was like, and I thought about that, and it's like, after you get there and you accept salvation and you find yourself in his presence, you can kind of look back and see every single one of those 155 interactions. And I think that's just a number he just kind of pulled out of thin air, but I really appreciate that. And I like using it too, because it really does, it is a path, and you really start it even before you find God, and all of those interactions are equally important. And I can look back and remember almost all of them.
Well, I got a funny story to tell you. Reacting to that 153. Okay. Uh, when I was 9 years old, I grew up in a little small community in Montgomery, Alabama. And we had our own little community Baptist church that was there. So when I was 9 years old is when I got saved. Okay. Well, I'm going to fast forward. I was 43, 44 years old, something like that. And I'd been involved with a Christian outdoor organization based in Missouri since 2011. And I had actually moved. I was living in Florida, and I got a phone call. And they said, "Hey, look, we've got an opening. I love the outdoors, so we've got an opening for you to come up and do some hunting if you would like to." I said, "Yeah, sure." Well, for quite a little while right there, there'd been something that had just been missing, and it wasn't there, altogether. And make a long story short, this place, I mean, it's a magnificent place. We'll talk about them sometime too if you want. But in fact, we have talked about them for the men's encounter.
Mhm.
But they have a huge lake there. It's a mile long lake. It's like a mile long, half a mile wide. Beautiful place. Well, I rededicated my life to Christ. And the reason behind that was because I wanted to be able to focus more on my faith and put myself out there for my faith. I think a lot of people, I call them Christians of convenience. They go through the motions, they get saved, and yeah, I'm Christian. But in the Bible, and I know I'm probably gonna butcher this, but I think there's well over 600 different laws in the Bible. Well, there's countless more laws out here in the civilian world that are not in the Bible. Well, if you picked and choose which one of those you wanted to obey, well, you know what? there's quite a good chance you're going to end up in prison somewhere. And it's like, in the Bible, if you pick and choose which ones you want to follow, well, you're really not following God. You're not doing what God tells you. And, well, I don't like that commandment. I don't really think I want to follow that one, but I'll follow the rest of them. Well, no, when you put yourself out there with God, it's an all or nothing deal. It's a solemn contract. I'm going to do what you want me to do to the best of my ability. I'm going to fall short. I'm going to screw up. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to do things wrong, but I'm going to try. And I don't think at that point in time that I'd really been putting my best foot forward and I'd really been doing what I needed to do. So,
Yeah.
And that was my decision. I decided that that's what I was going to do. And I did that. And what's really funny, and I'm gonna talk about you for just a real quick second here. I can't remember the exact date, but I do remember the phone call. I called you on the phone to see how you were doing. I think it was not too long after you'd gotten married, and to see how you were doing, what you were up to, and you had moved. And I didn't know. I thought you were still living in Florida, but you had moved. And buddy, you blurted out and were jumping up and down. And if I could have seen you, you were probably trying to do backflips and cartwheels at the same time, that you had found God. And I was like, I had to look at my phone, make sure I called the right person. I'm like, are you? I'm like, are you? You're not on drugs or drunk or anything, are you? And you're like, no, man, no. And you started giving me. You laid it out. You laid it out for me. Well, and I'm thinking to myself, you big dummy, you could have done this years ago. You could have had this experience years ago. But it all happens to us when it's supposed to happen. And man, you took a hold of that and you went full tilt boogie. I know everybody's going to go, man, this guy's really country, but you went with it, you ran with it, and I don't think I can honestly say this. I don't think I've been as proud to be your friend as I am now. Knowing that not only were you my brother in arms, but you're also my brother in Christ. And dude, it really means a lot. You know, um, we have various other friends that I wish we would follow the same path, but maybe one day eventually they'll find their way.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I, it's funny because I always use the excuse I probably would have became a Christian long ago had it not been for Christians, because we really we're our own worst enemy. But I to get back to that 155 interactions, they're so important. Captain Rogers, you remember Richardson? You remember Richardson over in
yeah.
the SSA? There's another one. All of these wonderful experiences uh, definitely play a part into it, and we have to remember as Christians that when we get there, we have to remember that we are probably going to be the best Christian that somebody's ever going to meet, and try to hold ourselves to a higher standard. But when you're in that sort of limbo area and you're like you want to like jump in with both feet into the baptismal, if you will, but we have a lot of people who are feeling very discouraged. That the enemy's been whispering in their ears, and they're feeling like they're just too far lost. They're just, they're out in the back 40, just kind of wandering around with a compass and a magnet, and that compass is just spinning around, and they don't know where they're going.
Well, I mean, and I'm fixing to tell my age here too. I graduated from high school in 1993. And when I graduated from high school, the internet and social media pretty much was non-existent. I mean, we did have internet. It sounded like a dying cat in a hailstorm when you hit dial up, but you know, um, we didn't have I mean, like right now, we didn't have cell phones that you could, sit here and communicate with. We didn't have laptops back then either. I mean, everything was all desktop computers. But I think, social media is a very, very, very bad double-edged sword. It allows people to have the conveniences of to be able to do a whole bunch of things that they would normally not be able to do. One of the biggest ones, I guess, is probably shopping. I mean, Amazon, man, they're booming, and they're all online. But it also allows for aspects of people who hate, and I use that word very strongly. They hate God. They hate God. They hate Christians, and they hate what we stand for. We can't. We have a voice, but they're doing everything that they possibly can to silence that voice. They don't want us to exist. They want chaos. They want anarchy. They want it like Burger King. They want it their way.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and
I agree with
and
it.
and there was a young man. I call him young because he's younger than I am. Who is no longer with us anymore. But he made a very, very bold statement on a interview that he was doing at a college campus. I think you might know who I'm talking
Mhm.
about. That the Bible, number one, first of all, let me backtrack here. Number one, there has never been any other book that has sold as many copies, no matter which version you want to put it in, as the Christian Bible ever in existence. That's first. Second, the Christian Bible is written in more languages than any other book in existence right now. So you have 100% easy access, not just online, but in a written word that you can put in front of you and read more than any other book ever. It is historically, geographically, and architecturally, sorry, the most correct book and historically in history.
Mhm.
There is certain things that you cannot deny. You cannot deny the fact that Jesus was born. You cannot deny the fact that Jesus died, and you can't deny the fact how he died. So I kind of look at it like this: if I can get you that far to believe that Jesus existed, and you can't really deny it. I mean, it's not just in the Bible, but it's in history books. Well, you know what? You're three-fourths of the way there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And but it's a hard pill for a Christian to swallow, for somebody to sit there and say, well, the book that you're reading is nothing but a bunch of fantasy land, nice, really cool stories. Well, they are really cool stories. I like those. I like those really cool stories because they're the truth. And I'm gonna share a little bit about my faith. I teach a class on Wednesday nights to junior high and high school kids at my church. And the one thing that I hear a lot of people say is, well, I can't touch God. I can't see God. I tell them, okay, I'm gonna give you a really, really, really simple solution to your problem. This is what I want you to do. So I want you to stand up and take a really deep breath. So they do it. I'm like, okay, well, did you see that air that just went into your lungs? Well, no. Can you reach out, take your hand, and actually touch air? Well, no. I said, but it's there, right? It exists, right? And you have faith that that air that you're breathing in is going to keep you from croaking and keeling over right there, right? I'm like, God is the same way. You can't see him, you can't touch him, but we have faith that he's there without being able to do those things. I said, but here's one thing that you can do. I said, I guess actually technically you can see God. And they're like, well, I don't understand how. I said, well, let's step outside. I'm an outdoors guy. I say, look at the trees, look at the birds, look at the animals, look at the grass that you're standing on right now. All of that is God, because God created that. You're looking at God's creation. You're looking at something that he made. I said, and if you want to take it even one step further, I said, you're staring at me and looking at me, and I'm looking at you. We're God's creation. We're made in his image. He made us in his image. I said, so you can see God. You just can't see God.
Yeah.
But you can see what he has done. You can see the things that he's done.
Yeah. I want to talk about how you brought it up with social media, that there's a lot of bad things out there, and I think again Christians have a tendency to be our own worst enemy. We when social media really started to blossom, and like the new age of internet, churches were very hesitant to participate in that. One of the small blessings from COVID is that it forced some of the churches to get into social media and YouTube, and it's just a tool that we can use. And if the enemy's going to use it and we're not, that means the only one using this tool is the enemy, and that can be very, very discouraging for some people. So you and I have been through. I mean, we've had our ups and we've had our downs, and I want to focus on those who kind of feel like they're kind of out there and lost, and we can. I mean, you and I can spend hours discussing apologetics and the archaeological and all of that, but I think what I want to what I kind of want to nail on is those who feel like they're going to lose out. Like, I mean, my story. Like when I became a believer, all of my previous life's friends and family, like they stopped speaking to me,
Right.
and it taught me to rely solely on God, and so as somebody who was saved, at 9 years old, and you kind of lost that focus a little bit, and I know from speaking to others that that's sometimes can be even more difficult than like what my story is, because you feel like you've failed God twice, or you've betrayed Him, or it's even harder to step back into that role of faith and evangelist. And what advice would you give to those who are kind of in the same sort of boat? Maybe they were raised in the church and they've made some mistakes, and now they're kind of looking at their life going, I've really messed up, and what do I do next?
Well, there's an old saying that says, when one door closes, another door opens. And yeah, we've screwed up. We make mistakes. Everybody makes dumb decisions and does dumb things on a daily basis. But the thing is, if and I'm going to use both you and me for an example. All your friends and family members who aren't followers of Christ, they're like, we can't have anything to do with you anymore. Is that hurtful? Is it painful? Well, yeah, of course it is. I mean, these are people that you've depended on and talked to and looked to for guidance for, forever, for your whole entire life. But as far as being too far gone, number one, there's, in my opinion, I mean, solely my opinion, I don't think there's anybody that's too far gone.
I
You know,
agree. Absolutely. 100%.
I mean, there are people who, and you got to take their word for it, but there are people who are who are in prison right now for some of the most heinous crimes that's ever been committed in the world, and they say they found God, and that they've dedicated their life to Christ. You know what? If that guy who did all that bad stuff can do it, then anybody can do it. I mean, the problem is being willing to, in my opinion, and social media has made it kind of hard, for a lot of people too, is to be willing to, stick your hand out and ask for help. I can't do this on my own. I keep looking behind you and I see your, all your stuff from the 101st Airborne Division, and a lot of those same, ribbons and medals that you have, I have too. And when we're in the Army, we have to work together. We're a team. And, like and I'm going to revert back to military. You got a guy who tests well, but, can't do push-ups to save his life. And then you got the guy who is, the PT stud, but, when it comes to taking tests, he's lost in the sauce too. So you
Mhm.
work together and you help each other out. The problem is, especially with guys like us, we are type A alpha mentality personnel. We always want to be the leader. We always want to be in control and be in charge. Well, two things you got to do if you want to, if you're if you have found God, or if you found God long time ago and you've kind of veered away. Okay. Number one, first thing you got to realize is you're not in charge. He is. He's in charge. He's the guy. He's the man. Second thing you've got to be willing to do is look at people that for a fact are followers of Christ, and swallow that big lump in your throat, suck up your pride a little bit, and go to them and say, hey, I need help. I have an issue. This is what's going on. And I don't think that I'm worthy to be a Christian anymore. And this is why. Um, you know, I teach a thing in my class a lot, to my kids in my class, and I'll tell them, I'll be like, hey, in being from the South and doing a lot of hunting and fishing and stuff, I'll look at them and I'll say, okay, well, if you're out hunting and you're walking down a paved road, that's a pretty easy walk, right? You ain't got any obstacles in your way, you can just walk along, willy-nilly doing your own thing. But when you veer off to the left or to the right and you start cutting through the woods, and you got thorns and you got briars and you got, thickets, and then you got to watch out for other creepy crawly things that'll bite you and hurt you, that road's hard. Well, I can go down the regular road. It may take me a whole lot longer to get there, or I can cut through this way and go this way, but it's harder. Well, that's the way of being a Christian. You know, the easiest way to get from point A to point B is a straight line. Well, sometimes that straight line, isn't as easy to get through. You're
Yeah.
dealing you are dealing with a daily barrage of crap. Whether it's stuff that's of your own doing that you put in your own way, or stuff that other people are throwing at you. And it comes from every single solitary direction. For those of us who have children now, granted, most all of my children are grown, but for those of us that have children that are in school, there's kids that they go to school with that, hey, why don't you come and do this? Why don't you come and do that? Forget about all that church stuff. You don't need that church stuff. And, and they see it, and they see their friends. Well, their friends are going out there having fun. They're doing drugs, drinking, all that fun stuff that everybody says is fun. Why can't I go do that? What's wrong? What's wrong with me? And that's younger kids. Well, then you get somebody who's even older, in their 50s, and they've been drinking and drugging their whole life. Well, why would God want somebody like me? I don't, or I don't need God. I'm doing just fine on my own. When you're really not.
Yeah, I think it's you make a good point about kids who get into high school and college, and they they've got the world just kind of harping at them and like, hey, why are you going to church and why are you praying so much? Don't you know God's not real? And I know you and I are in agreement on this one that apologetics is so important. And you made the statement earlier, like the amazing facts in the Bible, and that archaeologists use the Bible to try to figure out where they're going to dig. And we don't instill our youth with the answers to these questions that the world's going to ask. Why do you believe when dot dot dot? Fill in the blank. Why when there's babies who have cancer or whatever the excuse they try to use. And we don't instill the answers to those questions in our kids before we release them into the world. And so when the world starts asking them questions, they're like, they have no answer for it. And so that a lot of them get pulled astray. And those that get pulled astray, they need to understand that nobody is you're never too lost. All you got to do is rely on your soldiers, your brothers in arms, your fellow Christians to kind of bring you back in. But make sure they're good soldiers, make sure they're good Christians, because we Jesus says that we will be seen and known that we are his followers by our works, and we need to pay attention to those around us.
Well, I've told some people, I've had some kids that have come into my class, and this is, like I said, I've been teaching this class for a while. And, what's really sad is I had a young lady who was in my classroom. She was a senior in high school. And she was actually being raised by her great grandmother. Or excuse me, no, I'm sorry, my bad. Her great grandmother.
That's still impressive.
Yeah. And because every other person in her family was either A, in prison, or B, had passed away. She had no aunts, uncles, cousins, brothers, sisters, mom, dad, grandma, nobody to rely on. Well, here's this girl, 17 years old, okay, a senior in high school, getting ready to graduate, financially, knows that there is absolutely positively no way she's going to be able to go to college. But she would come to my class on Wednesday night with a smile on her face and be chipper and, and really wanting to learn and wanting to sit there, and would ask a million and one questions, almost to nauseam, about, certain things in the Bible. And, and it was that right there that showed me that not all these kids that are out there are being influenced by social media. Some of them really want to know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
we've been talking about kids, and I said both of mine are grown. So I'm going to touch on that a little bit. I have one son who is my actual son. He lives somewhere here in Florida. We haven't spoken in a very 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 long time, and that's a totally different ball of wax there. I he knows that my door is always open. He's always welcome to come knock on the door, and one day I'm hoping that that might happen. But in and I'm hoping I got the year right. In 2019, the my wife I'm currently married to now, her daughter came to me and wanted me to do a legal adult adoption. So she is she is my daughter. She has my last name legally, and she is extraordinarily involved in my church. She loves going to church, and she has met a young man at my church, a very fine young man who is also very involved in our church. And I'm hoping that somewhere here in the near future that I'm going to be hearing wedding bells, and I'm going to be walking her down the aisle to get married to this young man. Now I'm going to go to the flip side of that coin. I have a stepdaughter who I basically raised from the time she was in sixth grade until she was, helped helped guiding her, raising and guiding her, even still occasionally today. I want to say it was back in 2017, I do believe was the year she got married to a woman.
Now, before we continue, I want to point out one thing. I always forget that she's not biologically yours.
Right.
I
Yes.
always forget that. You always, whenever we talk about your kids, the way you talk about them, and I always forget that she's not actually biologically yours. I'm always like, well, your two daughters, and I never remember that. You love your kids through and through and through. I wanted like because you have a lot of like step parents who are like, oh, I treat my kids as my own. Like we have never referred to any of your children as anything other than your children. Like you love your kids, you raise your kids. I want to.
Well,
It's so heartwarming, and I'm so proud of you for that, and I love that so much. Which is why I really wanted to like point that out. Not has anything to do with their lifestyle or anything like that, but you really, I mean, like above and beyond. It's always been such a beautiful thing to the point where like I said, I can't even remember that they're not biologically yours. But sorry, I cut you off.
oh no, you're good. You're good, man. No, I have another stepson who is her brother. I mean, I was raising him when he was 8 years old. Up until he became a grown man. He moved out on his own, and and occasionally, every once in a while, I'll get some questions, about some things. But he is both of them have grown up. They one of them lives in Missouri, the other one lives in Arkansas. But my stepdaughter, I'm not going to call her by name on here because she may not want that, but she came to me and she told me that she was dating someone, and her whole entire life she'd always dated guys. It had never been a big deal, and I'm like, okay, well, she's got a new boyfriend. So I said, well, I didn't know, had no idea. I said, well, I said, why don't you guys come up, and I'll cook us something to eat at the house, and you can come up, we can hang out and have some fun. Well, she showed up, and the person she was dating was a girl, and I didn't say anything while they were there. I love my daughter to death, and I'm not going to do anything to embarrass her, like that. But when they left, and I knew she was back home, and I knew she was by herself, I asked her. I said, "Am I, was I imagining things? Was my eyesight getting really that bad? But or?" And she said, "No, I'm in love." Well, I sat down and I didn't say anything to her about it. And I just prayed that maybe this is just something that's just like a passing fad. You hear about people when they get into college, and she was about college age, that it was just a passing thing. Nope, wasn't a passing thing. Because about a year, roughly about a year, I guess, maybe after that, maybe not quite that long, um, I get in. We were talking on the phone, and they're telling me about that they're getting ready to have their wedding. I'm going to tell you that was probably one of the hardest things I ever had to do was go to that. At that point in time in my life was to go to that wedding and be cordial and accepting of the whole entire idea. And we've had me and her have had conversations about it, and I've pointed out very vividly that biblically what she's doing is wrong. Now, you've got that side. Well, now you got the side of, like you just said a minute ago, trying to be that loving parent, and and wanting to be there for your kids, and and be that person that they can call on and talk to and have a conversation with. And it was a hard pill to swallow, but I finally told her, I said, you know what? I said, for a fact that I will never. I accept you, and I accept Samantha, but I'll never accept your lifestyle. I can't. I cannot. I love you beyond measure. I would help you out in any situation I possibly could if I had, if you needed me to. But if that is what makes you happy, then, okay. I just want you to understand that what you are doing is wrong. Now, you accepting the fact of what I say is probably not going to happen. But I want you to know where I stand with it. Well, now, fast forward, I do believe in August, can't remember what day in August, they have a son. My daughter did in vitro fertilization a few years ago. They have a son who I think it's in August. He's starting pre-K. And now I've had the pleasure of meeting him a few times, but like I said, she lives in Arkansas. She doesn't live in Florida anymore. And our conversations due to other things have gotten less and less. But, like I said, I still care about her. I still love her. I do have my daughter who I adopted, who lives here in Florida with me, and her brother also lives here with us as well. Love them both to death. They know that 100% they can count on me for anything and everything. And we as a family, we might fuss, fight, argue, and not always agree, but don't try to stick yourself in the mix if you don't belong, because you're going to get your head bit off quick around
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. I want to, it brings to mind the story of the prodigal son. And we always talk about, the 99 and the one that get lost. But like in that story, the father never curses his child. He says, listen, what you're doing is wrong. It's wrong. I love you. If you ever come back, I'll welcome you with open arms. And the child comes back, and I pray and you pray that, your child, comes back. But, in our day, we have cell phones and email and social media, and we can still communicate. And I don't think it's any easier for us than for the man in the prodigal son, who didn't have communication with his child. And when, we all know the end of the story, the prodigal son comes back, and, the father rejoices, and he says, let's slaughter the fattened calf. And we're going to have this great, big welcome home party. And the son that stuck around is like, hey, what about me? Like he cursed you. He took his inheritance. And he says, my son is back to life. And, we pray for your daughter. But there's a lot of people out there who don't understand that, because we're able to talk to our children and talk to people who are in these situations, we have to do so in a loving manner without slamming that door shut and just ultimately just curse them, like, get out of my life. Like, no, you still, Jesus sat down and supped with the prostitutes and the tax collectors and all the sinners. And the reason he did that was so he had that constant communication. I think it's so beautiful that, it's difficult. I understand it's difficult to straddle that fence and, try to be the good Christian, good father, and still be, a loving father, and not curse them. And I commend you for it.
Well, let me give you an example. Okay. You're a pastor at a church, and and I belong to a very conservative. If you were to hear my pastor preach, you'd understand where I'm coming from with that. Southern Baptist Church. Okay. If we excluded the people to come into our church that were, alcoholics, drug addicts, that were skirt chasing after women all the time, or that, like you just said, people, women who were giving it up to every guy. If we were to exclude them from our church and say, nope, you can't come in. That's the people we're supposed to be helping. That's the people you're supposed to reach out to. That's the people, not the person who grows up in a Christian home and has been exposed to it since they were a child. you know, them becoming a Christian is going to be a little bit easier and a little bit more natural for them to follow, as opposed to the person who is the pagan and has, and doesn't believe in God, or, who thinks that they're way, like you said earlier, out in the back 40 and way too lost and way too far gone. That's the people that you're supposed to reach out to the most.
Yeah.
Because, if you don't reach out to them, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, and you know what I'm talking about 100%. Satan's going to. He's going to reach out real quick, and he's going, man, he's going to be that little voice sitting on their shoulder. Just come follow me. Come follow me. It's better over here on this side. I got better things over here on this side. So, that's why, you see a lot of these, and I'm not going to call any out by name, because personally, I don't really know any by name, but you see a lot of these churches that, if you're not dressed a certain way, or, you're not from a certain social class of people, then you're not accepted in the church. If a guy who is a bum on the street and doesn't have two pennies to rub together wants to come in church and wants to listen and wants to worship God, what's the difference between him and the guy that's sitting in there in a $10,000 suit?
No.
You know the difference? The guy that's in the $10,000 suit paid way too much money for his clothes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, you and I know Scripture says it's almost like the further far, the reason I called this podcast Too Far Gone, the further out you are, not only like the more you need God, but the more you're welcomed. Like when the 99 get left behind, so Jesus can bring the one back, all of heaven rejoices. Like you have a fan club, you have a cheerleading squad in heaven, that it's like when you come back to the church, all of heaven rejoices. Like the further, if you're, you'll get this reference, and other people get this reference. The more lost the lieutenant is out in the woods, the more he needs to be found, the more he needs to be brought back into battalion headquarters. And yeah, we need to remind people that the further out they are, the more they need to be brought in, and remind the church that they need to be bringing people in. If everybody in your church looks the same and sounds the same, you may not be doing the right thing.
I have been, when I was growing up and I was in high school, there is a church in Hoover, Alabama. It is Shades Mountain Baptist Church. Okay. This church is massive. And when I say massive, I mean massive. You're talking 3, 4, 5,000 people can fit in this church on a Sunday. It is what they would a lot of people would consider to be a mega church. And I had a great time while I was there. I've had a lot of friends when I was in high school. We'd go on Wednesday nights, and and we would learn, and and things like that. But now I'm going to fast forward to now, and I will be 52 years old next week, and I go to a small church where we're looking at anywhere from 20 to 60 people on a Sunday. Okay. And my pastor that we have there, I believe I get fed more now than I ever have in my entire life when I go to church. And I think that's important. If you're going to church, and I'm going to say this because I hope people that listen to your podcast will hear what I'm saying. If you're going to church and you feel like you're nothing but a number, and you're just you're just there, you don't have that what you would consider a personal connection with your pastor, go and look at other churches. You want to be able to say, when I walk out of this church on Sunday morning and I go home, I feel like I got something out of going to church, rather than I saw my friends at church this morning, and we had a cup of coffee, and now we're going to go eat lunch at the local barbecue place. You want to make sure that you're getting something out of going to church, because when you're not getting anything, because let's face it, I would say probably 75% of all Christians, when they except for when they're in church, they don't read their Bible. They don't open their Bible up during the week and and study and do things on their own. And so you got the 25% that does, and a lot of times that 25% are leaders in the church, or or they are people who have who are extremely rooted in their church, but 75% don't. So if you're not going to open it up and read it during the week, and the only time you're going to actually get some scripture into your system is when you go to church on Sundays or on Wednesdays, then you need to make sure you're somewhere where you're gonna get that. Your church that you're pastoring or have been pastoring, you've kind of seen some changes, and you see some up weeks and some down weeks, and but the thing is when they walk out of your church, you live in a very small town. We've talked about where you live at, and where my church is it is an unincorporated community just right outside. Well, you'll know what I'm talking about. Right outside Middleburg,
Mm-hmm. Oh
Florida,
yeah.
in Clay Hill. And the thing is I can, if I'm in town, I can see people that I go to church with, and I can walk up to them and talk to them and say, "Hey, how you doing?" And talk to my pastor. Walk up, shake his hand. If you see him at a restaurant or at the gas station or whatever. And that's what you want. You want to be able to know that if like in your case, if you see somebody at the local horse tack shop, or if you see somebody out, riding a horse down the road, because I know you do a lot with horses, you know, and they go, "Hey, what's going on there, man? What's going on, Pastor?" That, and they know you, and they have a personal relationship with you. Because if they don't, you kind of get lost in the mix. And it's great to have, I'm not knocking having, Bible study groups and prayer groups and stuff like that. I'm not knocking that in the least, but you know your pastor is there to lead you. He is there to teach you and to lead you and to set an example. And if you don't have that, go look at another church and see what you can find.
Yeah. Well, I am going to wrap this up, but I definitely we need to continue this. I think we're going to have
A part
two
two.
part. Yeah, definitely. We'll schedule another one. What do you got going on right now? I know you do so much with veterans and so much with nonprofits. Give me how can we support you? How can we help you out? Like, where do we want to send people?
All right. So, number one, I am very involved in my church. My wife is involved in my church now too. My daughter's involved. So, but as far as veterans are concerned, there is an organization called Peterson Outdoor Ministries. They have been around since 2006. They are celebrating their 20th year this year, and they've seen a lot of ups and downs. This organization was actually started by a guy who has never served one day in the military. He there's just like there's a Nashville, Tennessee. Well, there's a Nashville, Missouri as well, and that's where he's from. And at his church, he was seeing a lot of soldiers coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq that, were in need. They needed something. Well, he has always been really big into the outdoors his whole entire life. So he took it upon himself to start a nonprofit for veterans. Like I said, that was back in 2006. Now you fast forward to today, and they own a property in Sheldon, Missouri. I mean, man, this place is absolutely amazingly beautiful. I think they've got enough housing now that they can house over 100 people at one time. They've got, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think he said it was like about a 25,000 square foot lodge. That, yeah, I mean, the place is, I mean, it is massive. It is absolutely beautiful. But I would encourage people to, they're always looking for people, not only for volunteers, but they're always looking for donations, and everything is 100%, put back into the ministry. It is not, they don't give money away. And the guy that runs it, he's a really good friend of mine. I've known him since 2011. His name's Tron Peterson. He is actually the only paid employee at the nonprofit. He is the only one who receives a paycheck, and his paycheck is not. He ain't living like a Rockefeller or a Kennedy. He's but he loves what he does, and he doesn't do it for the money. He does it for the fact that to not only help veterans, cope with everything that they've got going on, but to also try to get veterans to come to know God. And they have had, dude, I've lost count, but they've had countless people through first responder men's encounters, deer hunts, turkey hunts, bass tournaments, veterans men's encounters. They've had countless people that have gotten saved and that have come to know Christ. And it is an organization that is well worth looking into. Please look them up on Facebook. They're all over Facebook. They always have something going on throughout the year. And
is that the best way? Is that the best way to find them and reach out to them? Is on Facebook?
Yes, it is the best way, because that is where they keep the most up-to-date information about things that they've got going on. The big thing they're working on right now, like I said, this is their 20th year, so they have a veterans reunion deer hunt that is going on in the second week of November. It starts right after Veterans Day, and they are planning on having a ton of people. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to make it this year. It had some other things going on, but in fact, I was on the phone with Tron Peterson today. I talked to him earlier this morning, and he's super excited about it. Stressed, but excited. But that is the best way to get a hold of him. Is on Facebook. But dude, I would look forward to a two-part, a two-parter. I just a little FYI for you. I will be in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, the very first week of November. I'm not exactly for sure how far that is from you, but we're going to be we're taking a family vacation. We're going to go to going to stay in. I think we're staying in Sevierville, which Pigeon Forge, Sevierville is right there together. So,
yeah, not too far from me at all.
If you wanted to come over and meet the family and have lunch one day, I mean that'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, definitely do that, and we'll schedule another time for us to sit down and talk. This is so good. All right, everybody, we are going to wrap up, and make sure you check out, what was the name of that again?
Peterson Outdoor Ministries.
Peterson Outdoor Ministries. We will put a link. Mark, you give me a link. We'll put it down in the comments on our YouTube channel. And I hope everybody every time I talk to you, I always get so much wonderful nuggets. And I hope that everybody will listen to this. And I pray everybody likes, shares, subscribes, and sharing this. You don't know what message your friends and family need to hear. So share it with them too. Brother, it's always an honor and a pleasure.
Yes, sir.